my objective in coming here is to find co-founders in cities everywhere to start building these networks. As Jason noted, the internet exploded after it started. If you go back and read Tesla's, and I'll send you links to this stuff, Tesla in 1926 interview with Collier magazine said, when the network is fully built, the world will be one giant brain and you'll walk around with your video television in your vest pocket. Now his sense of style was wrong, but his idea of what the technology was like was perfect. Okay, Hedy Lamarr patented Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in 1942. It wasn't until the federal courts declared the federal communications monopoly unconstitutional in 1982 that then the next year, Frank Caulfield, class of 62 out of West Point, invested in what became AOL. Jim Kimsey was put in charge of running it, and You Got Mail became spammed in CDs that you would get, or discs you would get every, couple weeks. You get a disc saying sign up for email. Okay, and so what happened was this massive explosion of ISPs everywhere. Okay, physical internet is a registered trademark of mine, and I'll show you the claims that are issued in my patent. But we're going to build a physical internet where we packet switch people and freight in, and that network will be comprised of hyperloops between cities. That'll be the fiber optics. JPods are the Wi-Fi, the local area networks, and self-driving cars, drones, Bluetooth are the Bluetooth, the last mile and off network devices. Okay. All right, so what I want to do is I want to show you some slides. I'm going to blast through them really fast, and you can cut me off anytime you want, but I want to show you the tools we have available for you to be a co-founder, and I will give you equity in the company that owns and builds the networks in wherever you live, okay? And we want to use all right, so more than technology, the single most important thing we will build is a company culture. I want to leverage the ethics and the culture of Service Academy grads to form the kernel of how we are going to build this physical internet. And you can read the book, Nothing Like It in the World, which is a case study in how the transcontinental railroads were funded and built. And that is exactly what we are going to do. We are going to repeat that exact behavior. Okay, so if I could share my screen.
You should have sharing permission.
Okay. So the problem with urban transportation is that we are moving 2 tons to move a person.
This just isn't working.
Let's change it. Cleaner, faster, safer, and more affordable transportation is possible.
My name is Megan Keller.
I'm Bill James.
And with your help, we can build JPods.
Okay, Democrat. Oh.
This looks like a ride from an amusement park. So how does it work?
Think of a rail and a container. You get in one of these little pods, tell the computer where you want to go and it goes, and the network takes you there. So a personal train.
He calls them JPods, part cable car and part subway system.
Okay, so 50x less than buses, 25x less than trains, and 10x less than cars. We can build transportation systems. So Democrats want to spend $2 trillion on more of what's failing, and Republicans want to spend $928 billion, and we are going to preempt it with this physical internet. Okay, my objective here is to find people that want to be co-founders. Here's an illustration of the speed of the change that is coming. This is New York City Easter Day Parade. In 1900, there was 1 car in the parade, and in 1913, there was 1 horse. Okay, in 8 years, everything about transportation that you know is going to be driven into transportation as a service. My patent is on self-driving cars on grade separated guideways that use robot networks to manage it. And then use that structure to deploy the solar collectors to power it. All right, and we studied nuke engineering, and we were stunned to realize that we could gather 5 megawatt hours per mile of guideway per day between the 45th parallels, and that's 40,000 vehicle miles of power.
Hey,
My
Bill,
first-
can I just want to ask a quick question here. I want to check my own understanding. So I came to Bali sort of by way of Miami from Chicago, right? So if you and I get on a train in Chicago, I'm in the front car, you're in the back car. And when we get off the train, we're in the same place. But as I understand it, with the JPods, the individual cars can switch to completely different destinations. Is that correct?
You don't travel with other people. Think about Uber on guideways.
Mhm.
All right, or Teslas. It's by grade separating, you remove all the complexities of self-driving cars. So these are just a network of self-driving cars on freeways, but we make them on suspended freeways because then you take out the 1,200 pounds of payload or a suspension weight. So instead of burning oil or burning electricity, moving 2 tons to move a person, you got a 500-pound capsule that can move 1,200 pounds of payload.
Mhm. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, please. Anybody, anytime in here, just stop me like that. That'd be perfect. All right. So my first experience with this grade separation stuff was about an 8-year-old kid cleaning my grandpa's barn. And a little kid could move tons of shit. Okay. Because he had one of these half barrels hanging from a guideway, and you could fill it up and you could push it out. I was too short to use a wheelbarrow, and the ground was really hard to use it on. With this, I could move tons. And then as an infantry officer, I used this with helicopters to pinpoint logistical deliveries. And we're just doing the same thing. Okay. Now, the action that we need each co-founder to do is get this 5x5 standard passed in their local community that says, if we build it with private capital, are 5 times more efficient, we pay 5% of gross revenues to use of the rights of way, and we're regulated by the same standards as Disney's monorail or thrill rides. So basically we're going to turn cities into theme parks. And there is a picture of it as pinning in the Massachusetts legislature in the top left. And Goldman Sachs has given us a letter of interest for putting $4 to $6 billion into these networks if we can get them this 5x5 standard adopted. And what the 5x5 standard does for them is it gives them a known cost of regulation, so they have a known cost on their payback. All right, we've got scale models. Here is Skyride, and there's my granddaughter riding on it. So we've got all of these tools. We've got this 3D software that can render these and throw them into Google Earth or anywhere. Here it is looking at what it would like connecting the train stations to LaGuardia Airport. Right now, New York City wants to spend $2 billion to connect the 2 miles between the train stations and LaGuardia. In the environmental impact statement, they admit that JPods is qualified. Then they put us in at that same billion dollar a mile instead of the $35 million a mile that would cost in New York. But here's a 1 point. All right, so this is route time software that lets you design a network for any place. And then see the red cross? That's your start point. It's up at LaGuardia Airport, where you can go in 5 minutes by walking, riding, and walking. Is green is 5 minutes, blue is 10 minutes, yellow is 20 minutes, and red is 30 minutes. So basically you could get anywhere in Queens in about 15 minutes when we build this network. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without a car. All right, so if we can design these for your cities just like this, okay? Here's an example where I showed this in a presentation with Maryland's Secretary of Transportation, how we would cross-connect all the metros. So the prime law of networks is that the value of a network goes up exponentially based upon the number of interconnected nodes. Right now we have hub and spoke. When you start cross-connecting things, the value of networks explode. All right. So, and we also have rescue rail that we can throw up over broken heavy infrastructure after earthquakes or hurricanes to reduce the cost of recovery. Okay. Metrics, This is where, if you could ride, have you ever, CSX has a really excellent commercial where they show a Prius driving along, and it shows it driving up onto a freight car and says, what can a car that gets 50 miles per gallon do for the environment? Nearly as much as the cars that carry it. Our trains move a ton of freight, 423 miles on a gallon of fuel. So if we can move a ton at 400 miles per gallon, why are we moving a person at 25? All right. JPods just combines the efficiency of that don't stop start, remove the parasitic mass. And so we're about 3 times the cost of riding on a freight train, but this is mass DOT data. We're 50 times less than buses, 25 times less than the trains, and 10 times less than cars. And to give you an idea of the efficiency of, or how silly our transportation is designed, take your car empty of gas, put it in your driveway, get 5 of your strongest friends, put 1 gallon of gas in your car, and drive till you run out of gas. Now get out and push your car home. Okay? It will take you somewhere between 2 and 5 days. So that's a lot of man days in a single gallon of gas. All right? So here's a little girl pushing her mom in a pod, just to show you how little energy it takes. She's probably generating 35 watts. Judith is 74 years old, so it takes no energy. So in cities, when we build this, logistical costs are radically less. The capital cost, light rail is somewhere around $100 million a mile. This is around $10 million a mile.
Bill, can I poke at this for a second? I think this is important, but also really interesting. I remember 20 years ago in Seattle, they were having this giant argument between building a monorail or a light rail. It went on for a couple of years. They spent like $500 million or something just figuring it out. And I think it's still not done, right? So how is this different? Because I mean, it's also grade separated. I imagine there's a rail in there somewhere, right? So how is this different from the monorail, light rail sort of a concept that seems to be so hard to implement in a lot of cities?
Okay, so packet size, if you go back to the internet when it first came out, started rolling out, you had Apple Talk at 128 bytes and Token Ring at 1024. And Apple Talk was too little, Token Ring was too big, and TCP/IP was a 512 packet. It was a Goldilocks. So they got the packet size right. The right size packet for moving people and freight in a city is an automobile. So the car's the right answer, the highway's the wrong network.
Interesting.
Okay? You need to have the car is the right packet size. Half-ton pickup moves most logistics in a city.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about having freight rails come into a city, drop off containers, move them over to a warehouse, split them into 2 pallet-sized containers, and then delivering them out in a city. And by grade separating them, you've removed all the complexities of the organic plane, the kids on a bike, the deer, the dog, the whatever. Okay? So if you know anything about Six Sigma or just in time, the whole process of thinking is drive out the sources of variation. And when you grade separate, your number of variables drop off 2 to 3 orders of magnitude.
So why is it so cheap? Because I mean, you mentioned a price, it seemed impossible. $35 million a mile in New York City, something like that. How do you get it done so inexpensively?
Well, because I have a spreadsheet that you guys can have access to, where I've got bids on these things. Each pier is, it's $5,000 to put a footing in the ground. It's $10,000 to build the pier. It's $90,000 to build that 30 meters. And you just stack it up, and it's $2 million a mile to put the solar collectors in. It's just not very expensive.
How about, and is it because the JPods are just so much lighter than train cars that the
correct? So the cost of infrastructure goes up exponentially based upon the mass that they must carry and the height off the ground. So there's, so divided highways, elevated highways are extremely expensive because they're really, really have to be built to handle 2-ton vehicles moving nose to tail. When you make 500-pound pods, we can space them and they're all robots. So they all collaborate to spread their load. You can be sitting in a busy highway, absolutely jammed, going nowhere, and look over to the secondary roads nearby and they're empty. That doesn't happen in a JPod network. In a JPod network, all of that traffic parallel processes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So there's a very good segment that I was given after some cadets worked on this back in 2006 in the West Point Systems Engineering Handbook that said the automobile was designed to replace the horse. No concept was applied to any of its systems at all.
I see a question from Heath in the chat. What about larger container requirements, like the sorts of cargo that would require an 18-wheeler to move in a cargo container? Would they'd stay on the roads then, and
Sure,
the smaller stuff would?
Right, not my market.
Uh-huh.
All right, we're a niche, and anybody that wants to be a co-founder, the best niche for this is anywhere where you see a large number of shuttle vans. So airports to car rental to parking to convention centers, anywhere you see a large number of shuttle vans, you're looking at a 1 to 3 year payback on a $500 million network.
Mm-hmm. And can you prioritize packets through the network? Robert just posted a question about emergency vehicles. I mean, it seems like with the right priority, you could get people through your network faster than an ambulance on the road.
You're in. All right. So there's a difference between speed and quickness.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to go very fast if you remove all start stops.
Uh-huh.
Okay. 35 miles an hour, you can get around in most cities. If you look at if you put a GPS on your car, you'll find out that your average speed, including freeway times, is not very good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in terms of emergency vehicles, there's no traffic. So they would be faster than they would be in an ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no reason to if you really need to vacate people off from in front of them, you could, but there's probably no real reason to do that, but you could.
Gotcha. Interesting.
They're robots. So
again, sorry for the interruptions, but
oh no,
it's
please.
Really, really interesting. Go ahead, please.
All right, and so looking in Bali, so I went and dropped onto Street View in Bali, and you've got tons and tons of street traffic and no room. Okay, so when we put a pier is about 1 meter in diameter, and we can knit those into existing very dense cities, and then you grade separate it, and then everything above ground is manufactured. Everything that goes into the dirt is art. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and there's no significant real estate footprint. And we make vast numbers of stations. A station can be as small as 2 parking spaces. And people really don't understand capacity. They think that a lot of people get in a train, and they do, but they don't look at how long the tracks are empty between trains. Okay, and there is an incredibly good London Tube study and MIT study on how the queuing and transfers amplified contagion spread at least 6 times. So mass transit was the major vector in transmitting COVID. So the whole idea is, instead of having people wait for machines, machines should wait for people. And here is, when I'm running these things at a 1/4 second headway, they're 1 meter apart. I can put 21 vehicles in the space of cars obeying the 3-second rule. And again, the whole thing is you increase service by making it so that the machines wait for people instead of people for machines. Okay, and then also this instead of having to have the capital ability to buy a car, this is mobility as a service. So it's you on-demand mobility regardless of age, ability, or wealth. Okay, and from my point of view, my guess is that as we replace road traffic, then bike paths will go underneath these things and a city will become highly bikeable. To store the energy, so one of the great things, and I want service academies to go back to not having majors. So I studied nuclear engineering and organic chemistry, which you would never do in a normal major program. But what we did is we looked at this thing and said, what are we going to do with this 5 megawatt hours a day per mile? And so what you do is you electrolyze water into hydrogen and oxygen, mix the hydrogen with carbon dioxide, run it across the nickel ruthenium catalyst at 500 degrees C, we get methane. We can store all the energy we need in methane and oxygen and recombine them whenever we need electricity. So all of this stuff is going to be built. The money's available, the tech's available, and what we need is leaders to start creating companies in your own communities. And I've got a Pathfinder agreement where I don't know who's going to actually work and who's not. So what I do is I bind my personal shares to their personal shares so that if they work hard, I get rewarded. If they turn out to be a shitbird, then I can punish them, but I have to punish myself too.
I've got another question, if you don't mind, about it's a bit of a technical question, but can we talk about the energy requirement of the network, right? So I see that you got solar panels on top of the elevated, what would you call them, trackways, I suppose?
Guideways.
Guideways. So how, I mean, assuming that your network is operating at full capacity, how much of the energy requirement is actually being provided by those, and obviously it depends on whether you're in Miami or New York, right? But approximately how much of that energy requirement is being provided by the solar panels on the guideways?
Okay, so think of this as about 40,000 vehicle miles of power per mile of guideway per day. Okay, some guideways are going to run at 120,000 vehicles a day.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to run a deficit. A bunch of them are going to run at 5,000 a day, and they're going to run a surplus. So the network as a whole, the bigger these networks get, the more they will be the largest solar farms ever built.
Mm-hmm.
And they will be, my guess is they will be, so 8 US presidents have called us to action to end foreign oil addiction. We haven't done anything. World leaders have called for an end of climate change since Kyoto in '92. Nothing. These things at a 10 times lower cost are energy self-contained and carbon neutral.
So another question, we mentioned New York City a couple of times, right? So that's an interesting geometry, right? You've got narrow streets, you got tall buildings, right? So in this case, I suppose the guideways would go directly over existing streets. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So the whole idea is no new rights of way. The existing public ways are perfectly fine. So that's what the 5x5 standard says, is we can use public ways if we're 5 times more efficient than the government monopolies. Okay. So you just make it say, if we're 5 times more efficient, we don't need to do an environmental impact statement because we're 5 times more efficient. And we only use public rights of way. If somebody says, I don't want you to go across my land and we really need to, we don't build there. This is exactly like the internet in the early 80s, is that we can go pick niches that make good sense to us. Okay.
And then I presume you generate revenue the same way that any other transportation network would, by selling tickets and such.
Yeah. In fact, think about just in your own neighborhood where you've got a busy mall and it's got 2 malls and they're separated by a busy street or a freeway. So a 300-meter network connecting those becomes a theme park ride, and we make money as a theme park. Okay, we don't do big things, do small things well, and
lots of them.
And then start small, iterate relentlessly. Okay, and it's that starting small. We can start with incredibly tiny networks connecting 2 wings of a hospital with a horizontal elevator. In fact, next time you get in an elevator and push the button, you're riding in a vertical JPods. These are just a network of horizontal elevators. There's no magic to this. There's no mystery to the tech.
Interesting. Are you implementing anywhere at this point?
I thought that this would be incredibly easy. Okay. And I was talking with Steve Jobs about it because software I wrote was invited by Apple on 2 national tours. And he loved Segway. And so when we were working with Apple on those 2 national tours, Jobs was still around. And I tried to convince him he should jump in and help with JPods in 2000. And he thought the regulatory barriers would be too great. He was much wiser than me on that. But he liked the idea of physically packaging digital content. And then 18 months later, he came out with the iPod. Okay. So now iPod happens to be in my patent documents filed before the Apple iPod ever came out. So Tim Cook was copied on those emails. So I'm going to bring that up. Once we break the regulatory barriers and start building, then I'll take it back to Apple. But there's also a congressional study, PB-244854, Automated Guideway Transit, published in '75 to identify solutions to the '73 oil embargo, that laid out that government regulations had been the barrier for 4 to 6 decades. That was 46 years ago. Can I show you one little clip?
Sure.
Hang on. This is fun because this is the first, and it is still being used today. So all of this stuff is at jpods.com that we've been talking about.
There's a lot of content on that website.
Yeah, and we have simplified ones, but
One of the big problems in this country is something many of us run into every day: traffic jams. The urban planners are working on many possible solutions. Today, one of them was unveiled at the University of West Virginia, and Hal Walker reports.
This is the old concept in people movers: one man, one car, and for Morgantown, West Virginia, several traffic jams per day. The construction overhead forecasts a new concept inaugurated by the U.S. Department of Transportation on the campus of West Virginia University. It's called Personal Rapid Transit. It replaces the internal combustion auto with an electrically powered computerized capsule that comes when you call and delivers you to your destination on a special roadway. In hilly Morgantown, the PRT, as it is called, will join the uphill and downtown campuses of the university by means of 2¼ miles of concrete roadway. It will be able to move 1,100 passengers every 20 minutes. Presently, the trip by bus can take up to an hour, depending on traffic. PRT makes it in 4 minutes.
okay. Now, if you watch the rest of that, Tricia Nixon was the one who opened it. And there was an anti-war protest going on in the background. So 1972, the year I graduated from West Point, was the first self-driving network of grade-separated self-driving cars in the world. And my patent, what it does is instead of having the central computer of Morgantown, it's all independent collaborative robots.
They hadn't thought of the suspended aspect of it at that point.
No, and they've got the wrong size packet. So that's an 18-person vehicle. So as nice as you are, I don't want to go where you want to go. I want to go where I want to go when I want to go there. So packet sizes should be around 1 trip.
So here's a question for you, Bill. Presumably cargo and people would share the same network, right? So
Sure.
Do you somehow shunt cargo containers off to a different loading dock? How do you? I imagine that one of the challenges is to get people on and off these things, people in cargo, right? So how do you manage the combination of the two on the same?
Well, they just go to their own. They just go to their own kind of stations. Here, I'll show you what a station behavior looks like. Okay, so here is.
All right. So it practically it's like it works like a train station almost. Just you get your own
Correct.
car. Yeah.
Ex-
Huh.
Except that you're not batching people up waiting for a train.
Mhm.
So when you arrive, I know you're coming because your phone starts chatting with the station when you're a ways away. And
Mhm.
I make sure that there's enough pods coming in to handle the fact that there's a stadium just emptied and there's 300 people walking towards the station. So
Mhm.
on the guideway, I've got inbound pods coming in so that as soon as people get in, they leave, and then I replace those pods. But cargo would go to a different station. So you've got, you have cargo pods, sewage pods, water pods, food pods, catering pods, many different, just like you have many different kinds of vehicles on a road.
Yeah.
So think of
Water.
this as a circulatory system for an economic community. You have 20 trillion little red blood cells in your body. You have white cells in there, you have other stuff, you have all kinds of junk moving around, you have waste products. You're just flowing through the same circulatory system.
Packet switching. This is great. Bill, that's actually an interesting point there about the self-driving cars, right? I mean, that I would imagine that the you're going to see what you've got going on up in the air in your JPods is going to be mirrored down on the roads as you've got more and more self-driving cars coordinating amongst themselves on the roadways, right?
Sure, you're going to see a lot of self-driving cars. I think you're going to see a lot of what we call local use vehicles come out.
Mhm.
Vehicles that are designed to go 20, 30 miles an hour and go 20 miles, but they just go back and forth. So
Mhm.
you come in, like in Vietnam, there was these mules that you would drop payload on that was basically a flatbed with a gas lawnmower engine in it that you could haul stuff around. You're going to see all of these. You're going to see a lot more innovation than we've seen in the past century, just popping up everywhere.